Hello, I've taken back my cellar, but I do thank Jim and Mike for filling in for me, so to speak, sort of. I started to listen to what they were talking about, and I disagreed with some of it, but then I remembered that I preach, these are opinions, So I'm going to go back and touch on a few of the questions that they might have already touched on. I don't know, because I didn't listen to most of it. I didn't want to influence. So, and I got a lot of things to talk about tonight, so I'm going to try to be quick. We'll start with this one. In modern RPGs, there's a healer role. What was the purpose of the cleric? Was it a fighter and magic user, or was it a healer? Bottom line, very beginning, way back when, the healer, the cleric, was Friar Tuck. That's who inspired it. There are no other great clerical, monkly persons. Brother Cadfael. All right, great detective, but not much of a fighter. He rounded it out because the original game wasn't about mass slaughter. The original game was about adventuring. And so you had a couple of fighters, and you had a magic user, and you had Friar Tuck along with you because he could help you fix you up, and he was a pretty doty figure all by himself. So the cleric was there to be the medic, one with the big red cross on his helmet. But he was also there to be a medic that wasn't bound by the Geneva Convention, if you will, who could pick up a weapon and split your skull. It's hard today in 2020 to describe what 46 years ago, the mindset that this was built and developed from. Movies were much more uncommon. The ideas that this game was mined from was much more limited. Okay, here we go. Do high-level spells have permanent effects on the caster's body as part of the cost to cast a spell? What sort of side effect is on failure? Okay, that failure. Whoa, hey, that hit me funny. Okay, in AD&D, wish cost the caster 3 years. Limited wish was a year. Permanency spell cost a point in Constitution. Resurrection aged the cleric 3 years. There might have been a couple of others too. Isn't that enough? I mean, good grief. Now, granted, what does age 3 years really mean? Other than if you roughly adhere to the age tables, I guess there are some. Wouldn't know. But I understand there are some. Okay, now all of a sudden you're 65 years old, and they're going to start, it's going to show up in your speed, and, stuff like that. So if you get that far into it, fine. Personally, I don't know of a campaign myself. I've maybe heard of 6 campaigns that have lasted, 25, 30 years. I'm sure there's others out there. I'm only saying that I've only heard of a few. Failure. Now, pardon me, but I'm old school. Spell failure. In my thinking, a failure is when the other guy makes his saving throw. And you don't have anything to do with that. He makes it or he doesn't. You can't affect that. I thought it was dealt that as a built-in, didn't work. Oh hell! You threw your last third level spell. He made his saving throw. It didn't work. That was a failure. But you have to have everybody go up in a cloud of stinking green smoke? No, I don't. Anyway, um, so I don't condone anything other than I don't know what other editions have come up with, what kind of crap they've come up with. It seems to me that in the let's all enjoy this story, let's go play this story tradition, that failure is when it doesn't work for you. It always goes off. You say the thing, you say the words, you make the gestures, you have the physical ingredients, it's going to go off. It fails when the caster or the target makes its saving throw. Or it fails a little if it halves the damage. That's the way I deal with it. Then there's a question of why didn't armor class lessen damage instead of doing what it did? Once again, it was the original concept of hit points as constituted by Dave and Gary in 1973 and 1974, that hit points was a measure of how long you could go before you eventually got drilled. It wasn't blood loss, it wasn't limb loss, it wasn't finger loss. So, instead of lessening damage, armor made you harder to hit. Then you could make stuff. You could enchant stuff. If back in the early years, people that were thinking about it started making their own spells in their campaigns to do exactly what they wanted it to do. And as a DM, it was our job to say, okay, that's going to take so much research, so much money, etc., 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 and so long. And if they were willing to pay the time, and it was easy back then when we had multiple characters, because you just kind of let that one go for a while and come back later when they were done doing their research. It was up to the DM. Everybody's world ran differently. I don't know which editions espouse what systems on doing that. I think that should just be part of however the campaign is flavored and shaped. I don't know if there's systems. I have no idea. Don't care. Are crystals a main component in magic wands? What are some of the most used components? Those are components of magic wands are anything the DM says. Go with some logic. Dealing with magic, I know it's a contradiction, but if you were casting a wand that threw light, well, yeah, you could put a quartz crystal or a diamond or something on the tip. If you are creating a wand or find a wand that allows you to levitate 4 feet off the floor, well, there might be incorporated in that wand the feather or the fur or whatever of a flying animal. It's entirely up to the DM to decide what goes in. J.K. Rowling got it right, I thought, very right, with the wand shop and what was in each one. This one had a phoenix, and this one had this, and this one had that, and the wands chose the wielder. And he's telling Harry, okay, this one's got this one's got that. There you go. It's whatever you want it to be. And that makes an adventure. if the magic user in the party can convince the rest of the party that it's worth going over and messing around, scouting around a wyvern's nest to see if you can find a feather, or scouting around something else's lair to see if you can find a scale, that's an adventure all in itself. And of course, as a DM, you can make it, okay, we're going to go get that, come back and find nothing. Or in the doing of that, you can allow the party to get a clue somewhere or find something or whatever and flesh out the campaign. But wands should have whatever you want them to have in them. I know of no hard and fast rules. This is a great place to use your own imagination as applied to fantasy. What do you want the wand to do? Okay, you want the wand to throw fire? Okay, that's some big thing that throws fire, a scale, a tooth, or whatever. You want it to glow warm on the tip so you can light fires? Okay, that's something much lesser. Whatever you want. There's no rule about it. There's nowhere that I've ever seen in the book that says, the wand of thus and such, which was constructed by with the following. Okay. Here we go. Why don't I like the spell point systems? Oh, let me count the ways. The spell system is set up with the levels of spells based on complexity and knowledge. I think is a valid structure for advancing as a spell user. Accumulating spell points perverts that entire ethic. And it also allows for some of the most blatant min-max crap you can think of. Now I'm gonna use my friend Jolly's Knights of the Dinner Table comic and the Knights themselves. Jolly is a gamer, has been a long time, and he sees what's good in us, and he sees the silliness. And the Knights, of course, embody most of the silliness. In the Knights, as in other campaigns, wizards make, or DMs let be found, some of the weirdest stuff. When you get bored with the charts in the books, you start making stuff up. And it's entirely up to the DM. Now, Jolly's got stuff like the toe ring of so-and-so that allows you to drain EPs off other members of the party, a few each day. And they've got, the bag, they've just taken, in the spirit of, how much can I get away with things, they've taken things to the nth degree. Crystals that store spells, all right. Okay, so taking that and converting over to points, your average, 4th, 5th level wizard, if he's got enough of these trinkets, extra points, etc., he's going to walk in and say, "Hi, I'm the USS Nimitz. What do you need destroyed?" That doesn't make it, because if you can acquire points, therefore you got to be able to store points. So you got more points. Just like there are some things that allow you to have one more slot in a level or whatever because it's an artifact or it's a spell that you can use again and again, whatever. There is flexibility and changes available. But spell points would just be a disaster. It's like going to the casino with somebody else's bag of quarters, just flinging them at that slot machine. And I just don't. The tendency, the desire, the drive by so many players to min-max, to me, is not. It does not jibe with the original spirit of the game. It was not about killing stuff. Killing stuff was incidental. It was about adventuring, getting there, cross country. That was supposed to be part of the game too. It became just nothing but focused on dungeons. How the hell did you get from Dungeon A to Dungeon B? There should be the potential for some adventuring. It didn't start out as murder hobos, gangs of armed mercenaries running around looking for shit to kill. Oh, well. Let's see what else. With the Vancian system, to finish that up, with the Vancian system, you had to commit to your spells because you didn't really totally understand them. You hadn't mastered them. Mastery would be able to put that spell into an amulet on your neck or a ring on your finger would allow you to use it again and again without using up your slots. Let's see, what's next? Okay, I believe it is generally acknowledged elves, dwarves, and halflings were put into the early game as a way to leverage the popularity of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and his influence in favor of the game ever since. Was there anybody there at the time who was a Lord of the Rings enthusiast? Anyone who advocated or lobbied for elves and dwarves? Like, if I recall, Brian Bloom lobbied for the monk because of the popularity of the TV show Kung Fu. No. That stuff was all done before I got there. Okay, let's go back to late 73. Let's do that. And we're trying to make up a list of monsters. Monsters being anything that might pose a problem for the player characters, because this game is player character centric. And so you're going to sit down and you're going to get out your Grimms and your Mother Goose and every fairy tale book you got and look up bad guys. Okay, everybody knew it. Everybody had heard of goblins. Long before I played D&D, I'd heard of goblins in association with and connected to Halloween. And I'd heard of leprechauns and that through Irish folktales because my family was partially Irish. So I knew about, Irish myths and stuff, some, the popular stuff. Pardon me, I'm drying out. So before Tolkien, there were dwarves, there were elves. Yeah, the habit, the halfling, the habit or the halfling. That's Tolkien. And sure, Gary and Dave are going to sit down and make a list of every kind of monster that people had heard of, so that in their mind's eye they had an image or a sense of what it was. They didn't make lists of the stuff that hadn't been created yet. Take the Boule, for example, because nobody knew what the hell a Boule was. And early, ordinary stuff was plenty scary, plenty tough. So it wasn't to leverage popularity. It was to include stuff that people might be familiar with, might have heard of before. That's really, I know it can sound to be a subtle difference, but there really is a difference there. All right, next page. Here we go. This question, the third word, set off my head, almost exploded. The elf class Can use both sword and spell. Later versions kind of felt like you had to pick between the two, spell or sword. Can the elf use spells with sword in hand? Okay. This is a thing that we'd like to beat. Though I love the man dearly for what he did, I'd like to beat Tolkien around the ears for his elves, because his elves were totally different than most of. Let's say this: he did a better job of creating a new kind of elf than he did a new kind of dwarf. Dwarves in pre-Tolkien mythology or in stories were not the band of mugs that went to take on Smaug and all that. They were mean, they were vindictive, they were sneaky. So were elves and pixies and sprites. They were more often portrayed as mischievous, if not downright evil. Tolkien made them good guys. There's been in early mythology, fantasy mythology, associations with iron and magic. Cold iron defeats magic. There's several different pantheons and collections of folk tales and myths have this antipathy to magic in iron. That's why Gary didn't allow magic users to use swords. I personally don't like the fact that Tolkien's version of elves, which became so much of an influence on D&D elves, I don't like the fact that they do both, throw spells and wield magic. Now, if you want to be a real nitpicker, you could say that they don't carry iron swords, that they carry, some other metal. Okay, you can make excuses for it. Elf class. Elf was never a class. Elf was a race. Hi, I'm going to be a fighter. I'm an elf. My name's Twinkle Ears. Class? No, that clang. I would not allow an elf holding an iron sword to throw magic. No. I wouldn't do it it wouldn't work that way in my world, based on what I've said earlier about the predating mythologies always having this association between iron and magic. Look at some of Robert E. Howard's superstitions that he gave to Conan, and I believe there's a couple of references about good iron, cold iron. And that's opposed to steel, I guess, if you want to be a real nitpicker. Okay, alignment and ethics, philosophical rumbling. In my opinion, alignment determines a character's tests and challenge to prove their authenticity and ethical consistency. So the test of lawful good is to be good while being a bit conformist and obedient. Oh, and ethical... authentic. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not wearing my glasses. This is a long thing. The chaotic good character's test is to be good while being eccentric and a bit of a loner. Lawful good is to be good while being a bit conformist and obedient to his commanding officers. I always thought the best Hollywood dramatization of chaotic good conflicted with the temptations to be chaotic evil was the 2008 Joker chaotic evil versus Batman chaotic good. Okay, I don't have a lot of answers on that philosophical stuff. The concept of alignment was to make the players play consistently. if they started doing stuff that wasn't good and they started becoming bad or evil, then their good artifacts might not work anymore. They might only work for them, only work for the right alignment. There was a real early article by Gary that showed it was a graph that showed the quadrants of good and evil and law and chaos. And chaos did not originally mean only the Joker. It meant elves were chaotic in that you couldn't always predict what an elf would do in a given situation. They were chaotic. They were capricious. Substitute capricious for chaotic. And it lessens that. Lawful meant that they would always react in the same way because that's what lawful people did. The good and the evil, a whole different. Let's see, what was that? It's a whole kettle of different fish. Evil and good, that's pretty cut and dried. The neutral guy was the loner, the guy that hovered around the center of all these axes, and looked out for himself. And you'd be neutral good. Okay? So you weren't an evil guy. You didn't go around beating up little kids and kicking dogs. But you didn't necessarily go this way all the time or that way all the time. You kept true to yourself. And so sometimes it went a little on this side of the line, and most of the time you're on that side of the line. And it was up to the DM to point out to the player, hey, you haven't been, you haven't been really lawful good lately. And so, next time you looking for help, or don't expect to get answered on the first ring. That's more the concept of what the alignments were. They become much more over the years, and I've not always understood why. Sure, paladins, to remain a paladin, to have the advantages they have, and my God, look at the paladin and all the extra this and that and whatever, simply because they have to have outstanding stats to be a paladin. And when you're no longer, anti-paladin, paladin, whichever, you lose some of that vibe and become less paladin-like. Is it unfair for DMs to make their players fight their way back out of a dungeon they've just conquered? Well, I guess that would be if there was still something wandering around that they hadn't accounted for, and random chance said they ran into it. Okay, they ran into it. Beat up half the party before they finally killed it and got out. Well, that's just another part of the adventure. Are orcs racist? Is a universally evil being therefore racist, even if they hate their own race? For instance, Lord of the Ring orcs hate everything, including each other. Therefore, is a monster's universal animus egalitarian when compared to racist? I'm not going there. This whole thing about orcs being racist and this and that, I'm not going to say anything more about that than what I've said already. Let's see. He's got a whole slew of questions here. Can any character catch an arrow? Hell no. Either you got a special ability to do that, or some book that I'm not familiar with says that your race can do it, or you have an exceptional dexterity. You got an 18 dex and a high constitution, I might let you try, and I might even give you a fairly decent chance. But if you miss, you're going to take a serious wound. I'm going to give you the max of whatever the arrow does. If it's a 1 to 6, you're going to take 6 because it means it went through and screwed up your hand. And that's serious. And that's a serious impediment to staying alive. But there again, that's only a logical explanation of that damage. Otherwise, it's simply the ability to avoid the deathly blow. In this case, you can give a reason for a lessened ability to avoid that. Let's see. Critical successes. Now, I have no idea what that is. That's something that somebody made up long after. Alright. Does every character have a chance to catch an arrow shot at them? Hell no. What's wrong with random monster encounters? Do you like them or not? Well, you already say what's wrong with them. I probably said that I don't generally use them except when the party's lollygagging around. I might send something shuffling down the hall searching for a meal. Nothing ever horrible that might wipe out the party, just something that might shake them up pretty good and inflict a few wounds here and there if they don't wise up. Let's see, what he's got more. Sure, you want to know if I was running a campaign, any magic user in there could come and say, okay, I want to make this, I want to make that, and I would give them what I consider to be a reasonable set of requirements to be able to create that. I don't care how much magic's in a campaign. Magic don't scare me. I'm the DM. Let's see. No, this is the tail end of that question. Do you recommend DMs limit some aspects of the game universe in order to manage content creation? Part of a question here. Well, it's up. I did not sit down in 1974 after I came back from Gen Con and create a world. I sat down and I built a dungeon. And we played it and it was good. And so I started dropping clues here and there. And so we would get out the outdoor survival board and we'd move a few squares over and we'd do something else over here. And the world that we played in for those 18 months developed organically as I needed it. I created it. Nobody, I think, sits down, unless you're buying a world of Greyhawk, world of this, world of that. If you're buying a world, okay, I guess you got it all there. But the problem with that is, if they know what world they're playing in, they're going to go out and buy it and read it and know everything. Crap. Okay, so the D&D Beyond team, with those new edition players, was talking about allowing a cleric without deities, which I feel defeats the whole purpose of playing a cleric. Yes. Now, I never got into the specific deities. I always kind of abstracted it because I didn't really care. You had one. You told me what their if you declared one, you told me what their tenets, the tenets of that faith were, what they demanded, and how they looked at things, and that was that. I was not the priest police. Obviously, you have to be somewhere to. I treat clerics, what they do, as prayers, not spells. No mumbo jumbo, hocus pocus. It's a saint in their pantheon. It's an aspect. If their god has many aspects, they got to be praying to somebody because by nature, by rules, by definition, these boons are granted from somewhere else. So yeah, clerics got to have a deity. Come on. Now, the way I treat clerics is different than standard. I treat clerics as not having to commit to what prayers will I say today. I treat clerics that once you've got enough points to go from 4th to 5th level, you already know all the 5th level spells. You haven't been able to use them yet, but you've been studying them. And so at that point, you're done studying them, you've figured out the mastery, and you can use them all. More on magic users later. Why are orcs always evil in D&D? Always evil in D&D begs a greater question of why there are orcs in D&D at all. Its answer is the game is hierarchical, and it's game. Well, yeah, come on. Nobody writes a book without an antagonist, without a bad guy, without a problem, a dilemma, an ethical question. There has to be conflict. Conflict. Doesn't have to be blood conflict, but there has to be a conflict, a moral conflict, a mental conflict. Somebody's got to be bad. Until just recently, nobody had a problem with orcs being bad because in past stories of mythology, orcs have always been bad. So what? They're monsters. They don't exist. They're bad. So what? They're monsters. Get over it. They don't exist. They're make-believe. Okay. Let's see what else. Right, and this person says that we immediately see orcs and we fight them without finding if they're good or bad. To me, the idea of a good orc is somewhat antithetical. Now, there might be some that are neutral that you can get along with on a tense and uneasy basis on a border situation or whatever, but that's not the way it rolls in my world. That's all. If it rolls the other way in your world, fine. Fine. Let's see. Regarding Robbie's, this must be something that happened in last week's thing with Jim and Mike. Something about philosophy of alignment. Hollywood dramatizations can't deal with the moral complexity of lawful good versus lawful evil. Okay, I see. We're back to that. I say it's impossible to have a character be knowingly lawful evil outside of D&D or campy fantasy, as they would not think themselves as evil. That's a good point. But the alignment is more of an assessment on the behalf of the DM. It's a categorization on the behalf of the DM. Your behavior is going to take what you've done in the last 3 adventures, and he's going to assess that, and he's going to turn it into, it's him. It's the DM that determines your behavior and where you fall on that chart. If I remember, somebody sent me the comment to find that old chart. I believe it might have been in a very early Dragon or in a strategic review, and I'll share it with you next time and show you how you can float around in there and what the purpose of it was as a tool for the DM. Okay, let's see. Okay, Oliver Cromwell and the Puritan movement brought about a cruel and violent reordering of their world because they thought they were right and lawful. History is not very kind to Cromwell. Well, every guy that started a war thought he was right. It's up to history to determine who was lawful and who wasn't, just as it's up to the DM to determine if you're behaving in a way consistent with your professed alignment. At least that's my opinion. Okay, there's been an interesting to-do about fantasy and the disabled and wheelchairs. Obviously, I'm not disabled. Knock on wood. I did work with people with disabilities for over 20 years, building a chapter of an organization here in the greater Cincinnati area. So I have, I believe, some insight. We're playing fantasy. This is a game where 6 foot guys, 6 foot tall guys that weigh 260 pounds play hobbits. Where guys 5'9" and 140 soaking wet play Conan. This is fantasy. I know people who would not want their disability to be recognized because they're playing a character that doesn't have it, or that they don't want any attention drawn to their disability because they feel it'll influence the way people. Most of the people with disabilities that I met, the older ones particularly, wanted to be seen past the disability. Then I saw a bunch of wheelchairs, battle wheelchairs. What's a keen idea for a cartoon strip? And okay, I know it's fantasy, but if a person wants to take on the complexities of playing that role, there's a whole nother way you can foil their movement, foil their plans, whatever. That's up to them. I don't claim to understand it, but I don't think people ought to be shoving it down on other people's throats. This SJW crap's got to stop somewhere. It's fine to play wheelchair baseball or basketball. I just don't know that many disabled people that would insist in the fantasy setting. So I don't understand the big stink. Had a good interesting question. Have the players that learned to play in the 80s become the gatekeepers now? Let's take this word gatekeeper. Why don't we look at that? I've been accused of being a gatekeeper. Didn't know that. Of course, I got accused of mansplaining one time, and I'm sorry, I used to be a teacher, so I guess I mansplain everything. Let's take archery. There's basically roughly 2 kinds of archers. There's crossbow archers and there's longbow archers. Now, is the person that passionately advocates for longbows and derides crossbows, is he a gatekeeper? Because he thinks his thing is better than the other guy's thing? I don't. This gatekeeping concept is just getting way too misused. I always saw a gatekeeper as the guy that opened it to let you in, or held it and said, "No, I'm sorry, you're not allowed in here." Now, I don't look at that second one. I always thought a gatekeeper was the guy that opened it and let you in, not the guard. We all advocate for what we like the best. Let's take racing. I love dirt track racing. Modifieds, late models, especially wing sprints. I will look at the racing on paved tracks, and NASCAR and Xfinity and what have you. I don't say that, oh, you like that, you can't like this. No, don't come over and check it out. I'm the gatekeeper that opens the gate and says, "Come on in, look at this, check this out." So I'm not going to say, "Oh, you're only a NASCAR fan." Well, you're not a true racing fan. Crap. We like watching noisy things run around in circles or on road tracks. We're all racers, race fans. Are the 80s players? I guess the 80s players would be what? Second? The tail end of first edition and into second? I don't see it. But then again, I'm removed from the day to day. I don't know. I really don't know. And nobody should be a gatekeeper. Everybody should be a gate opener. Hey, come check out what I got over here. Come look at mine. Not, you do that? No, screw you. You can't come do what I do. That's bullshit. Okay. Last category. Or last question. Leveling up and training. I look at that the same way I look at clerics. In my opinion, the way I would run it, the way I do run it, or the way I have run it, you make that next level. I do not make you go learn new sword techniques or anything. No. In my opinion, you have acquired the necessary skill to now be the next level. Let's look at a karate dojo and you're learning karate. When you master the skills, you get the belt. You don't have to go do a bunch of special calisthenics to wear the belt. You don't have to go on a religious fast to wear the belt. I see it as having lived long enough, achieved enough, acquired enough tricks that now you are that much better. A higher level. Okay. My trip. Quick synopsis. All 17 of us met in Gulf Shores, Alabama, which is actually Fort Walton, but the post office calls it Gulf Shores. We had a house, there were 17 of us, we had a house that slept 18, and when you walked down the long front steps in the front of the house, you stepped into the sand on the beach. It was lovely, we had great weather, we had a magnificent view right out the front of the house that we had rented, out onto the Gulf, and at night we could see about 15 oil rigs at varying different distances, and a couple of them big ones close enough we'd see the tankers come to fill up. We had dolphins off the beach a couple of mornings. We had bait balls for non-fishermen when small fish that rely on masses to survive are threatened by a predator, they form a bait ball. When you see them jumping out of the water, that's because the predators are underneath. Well, the dolphins would be out there cruising along out beyond the second sandbar, and second sandbar is like 120 yards away and only came up to your armpits. They were out there cruising and waiting because they couldn't get over the two sandbars. And the bait ball, the prey fish, were staying in the shallows, which made them vulnerable to the gulls and the terns that were diving on them. So we had that all one day. We had our own little nature show out there. Took the three oldest great-grands and the youngest grand. She's 18 now and going to college. She's at college this week. We took them to Alligator Alley, which was a little short drive away, and they rescue nuisance alligators and whatever and throw them all in this swamp, and they had some monsters, and the kids just loved that. And 2 days later, the whole mob of us, all 17 of us, threatened the captain of the sightseeing boat that we'd take over, and because we were more than all the rest of them on there combined, for a dolphin cruise, which was magnificent because we found them. They were riding in the wake of the boat and jumping 4 or 5 feet off the stern. So all my little great-grands just wigged out when they saw the dolphin so close. Great trip. Had a great time. And came back. I was going to be taking a sleep test in a few days, so I had to have my first COVID test, and I'm negative. And now I'm not having a sleep test, so that was a waste. I'm going to have my shoulders operated on September 18th. And in the meantime, I'm going to be re-educating. I have an early edition of Dragon. I'm going to be re-educating it because I'm going to have to be doing dictation for quite some time because I can't really type for more than about 10 minutes at a time now. And so then there'll be therapy afterwards, and oh boy. But it's all good. I'm feeling good. The family's fine. Cheryl's fine. We celebrated our 50th. Nobody strangled anybody else in the family. We're all still on speaking terms. So I think all in all, it was a smashing vacation. Again, I'll thank Jim and Mike for stepping in and giving you something to do last week when I was gone. And on that cheery note, I'll say Doda Gobi. Oh, hello. I'm still figuring out when this thing starts. Welcome to my cellar.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs. Still quite a feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Last man around when them rates went down. Calling Gary in that Lake Geneva town. Hey Gary, it's an awful mess. Let me edit, we'll have success. D&D and Dragon Magazine.
He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar.
Magic missile, it's a mortar shell. Make it hit in the first level spell. Brought psionics to the game to attack that wizard brain. DSR and fantasy, collection of micro armory. Tight with tramp under a tree, high as could be. He's the curmudgeon who wrote about the dungeons. Now he's the feller, live from the cellar. Talks about D&D and old school RPGs, but he's still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Still quite the feller, the curmudgeon in the cellar. Curmudgeon.